The rain had just stopped when I walked down the narrow red soil path that led through the heart of Mbale village, my feet bare, my clothes stuck to my skin like regret. It was the kind of morning that smelled of wet charcoal, soaked cassava, and the faint bitterness of old secrets. The air was thick with the sound of chickens fluttering through puddles and women pounding yam with wooden pestles that echoed like heartbeats against clay walls. But no one noticed me. They never did. I was just the boy with the two thin arms and two big eyes, the one who fetched water before sunrise and swept the church steps when everyone else had gone home. My name is Nana, though people mostly called me that woman's son. Never truly mine, always someone else's burden. My mother, poor and mute since a mysterious illness took her voice, worked herself to the bone selling palm oil in rusted tins, her fingers always smelling of smoke and shame. I loved her with the quiet desperation of a child who had nothing else. We lived in a leaking mud hut behind the market, where rats claimed the night and whispers claimed the day. In a village like Mbale, silence was more dangerous than noise, because silence allowed cruelty to dress itself in tradition, and I, born into that silence, became its victim. The children mocked me, called me son of the cursed woman, threw stones and laughter in equal measure. The adults pretended not to see. Only one person ever looked at me with something other than disdain, old Baba Ejike, the blind cobbler whose hand stitched soles tighter than most families stitched love. He would call me over, ask me to describe the clouds, and in return tell me stories of men who rose from dust and became kings. But no story he told could prepare me for the day they decided I should disappear. It started with whispers about a missing goat, about stolen cola nuts, about evil eyes and curses passed from mother to son. And one morning, I woke up to the chief's guards outside our hut, their faces as blank as river stones. They said someone must pay. That piece demanded sacrifice, that the gods had spoken. My mother screamed, without sound, without words, but her eyes begged them like prayers. They dragged me away anyway. That night, they tied my hands, led me to the edge of the cassava fields, and buried me, alive, my face against the earth, mouth full of dust, lungs screaming against the weight. And just before the last shovel of soil came down, I saw him, Baba Ejike, standing far off, unmoving, watching, and then darkness, wet, suffocating, endless darkness. But I did not die. Somehow, the earth held me like a wounded child, and somewhere deep in that black silence, I made a promise. If I lived, I would come back, not just to breathe, but to burn, to rise not as the boy they buried, but as the man they never saw coming. When I woke, I didn't know if I was still buried or reborn. Everything was black, cold, heavy. I couldn't move my arms, my legs were numb, and my lungs begged for air. The soil was in my mouth, in my nose, under my nails, choking me slowly. My chest throbbed like a war drum. I couldn't scream, but I was alive, somehow. Maybe the gods weren't watching that night, or maybe for once, they took pity on the voiceless and the innocent. I didn't know. What I knew was that something inside me, some small, trembling part of me, refused to give in. It wasn't strength. It was something deeper. Desperation, maybe, or rage, or the memory of my mother's eyes the last time she saw me, silently breaking. I clawed my way up inch by inch, swallowing mud with every breath, until my fingers found air. I broke through like a drowned man, gasping for the sky. When I finally pulled myself out of that grave, I was no longer a boy. Something had died in that hole, and something else, something colder, had climbed out. I didn't go back to the village. I couldn't. I didn't want to see what they would do if they saw me breathing. Instead, I walked through forests that spoke in hisses and cracks, past rivers that glowed like fireflies at dusk. I begged for food, slept under trees, I grew stronger. I watched people, I listened, and I waited. In the city, I found others like me, ghosts in the daylight, forgotten children, bruised souls who carried stories too painful to tell. I worked at night, loading trucks, sweeping shops, doing whatever someone richer didn't want to do. I didn't talk much, but I remembered everything. I remembered the chief's son, who spat on me when I tried to play with them. I remembered the woman who sold bread and turned her back when I was slapped in the market. I remembered the church elder who smiled at my mother during service and called her a devil behind her back. I remembered them all. I wrote their names in my mind like a prayer or a curse. Years passed. My hands became strong, my mind sharper. I started saving every coin. I refused to eat what I didn't earn. I refused to sleep when I could be learning. I taught myself to read, first from torn newspapers, then from books I picked out of garbage heaps. History, law, strategy. I wasn't just surviving, I was studying, preparing. One day, I found a man who used to live in Mbali, who had left years before because they called his daughter a witch. His name was Keen. When I told him who I was, he didn't laugh or pity me. He looked at me with something like respect, and he offered me work, real work, hard, honest, and well paid. He was building a business, and he needed someone who knew how to keep quiet and move fast. I became his shadow. He taught me money, negotiation, power. And when he died suddenly, with no family and no heir, he left everything to me, just like that, as if the gods had been waiting. I was 29, rich, educated, dangerous, but not just because of money, because I still remembered the weight of the earth on my chest. I still remembered silence, and now I was ready to make noise. I bought land, not just any land, the land around Mbali, piece by piece, through proxies and quiet deals. I became a ghost with a pen, a shadow with a bank account. And when I owned enough to circle the village like a noose, I decided to go home. But I wouldn't go as Nana, the boy they buried. I would go as the man who returned from the dead. So I arrived on market day, in a long black coat, in a polished car with windows too dark to see through. I didn't speak when I stepped out. I let my eyes do the talking. And the moment my feet touched the soil, it was like the earth itself remembered me. The chickens scattered. The drummers stopped. And slowly they turned, one by one, wrinkled faces, widened eyes, gasps, whispers. That looks like, no, it can't be. But it was. And I didn't blink. I walked straight through the center of the square like I owned it. Because I did. I stopped in front of the chief's hut. He was older now, slower. His face had sagged into folds of guilt and wine. He didn't recognize me at first. Not until I said his name. Obiajulu. He froze. The color left his face. His guard stood still, confused. You buried me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. He staggered back. It's not possible. We we did what we had to. The gods demanded it. The gods were silent, I replied. It was your fear that spoke. Your cruelty. Behind me, more villagers gathered. Some recognized me, some didn't. But the silence in the air said everything. I'm not here to hurt you, I continued. I'm here to teach you. Then I handed him a scroll. A deed. The land beneath his feet now belonged to me, the water they drank, the roads they walked, the forest they feared, everything. I didn't threaten. I simply turned and walked away. Let the truth echo behind me. Let the guilt grow like weeds. Let the memory of my face haunt their sleep. Because I had returned, not just with money. I returned with eyes that had seen hell and walked back. And I was not done yet. I didn't sleep that first night back. I sat alone in the same forest they dragged me into as a boy, the same field where they dug the earth and shoved me in like a rotting fruit. I stared into the darkness, listening to the trees whisper the names of the dead and the forgotten, the betrayed and the abandoned. And somewhere deep in that rustling silence, I made another decision. Money could buy land, titles, even silence. But I didn't come back for their silence. I came back for their truth. The next morning, I walked into the village square at dawn. No coat, no car, just me, barefoot, with my sleeves rolled up and dirt still clinging to my hands. I asked for nothing. I simply sat on the edge of the old well, the same one they once told me not to touch, because I was unholy. And I waited. The first to come was Baba Ejike, the blind cobbler who had once told me stories of kings and dust. He had aged like wood in the sun, his face wrinkled like river bark, his hands still wrapped in leather and memory. He recognized my steps before I spoke. I knew you were not dead, he said quietly. I felt the wind change that night. The wind never lies. I nodded. I didn't ask him why he didn't stop them. I already knew some people survive not by fighting, but by fading. I didn't hate him, not anymore. He placed his hand on my head, murmured something only the spirits could hear, and walked away. Then others began to come. A woman with gray braids and tears in her eyes. She confessed she had lied about the stolen goat, that her own son had taken it. But she blamed me because my silence made it easy. A man came limping with a cane and said he stood with the mob that night because he was afraid the chief would punish him if he didn't. A boy, now grown, fell to his knees and said he once spat on my mother's doorstep, just to impress the older children. I listened to them all, not with anger, with something heavier. The weight of knowing that forgiveness is not a door you unlock. It's a bridge you build from broken bones. Then came the one I never expected, Chisholm, the chief's son, the one who spat on me, laughed at me, pushed me into the pigsty when we were children. He walked slowly, like each step cut through his pride. He didn't look me in the eye. We buried you because we thought we were doing the right thing, he whispered. We were told that sacrificing someone innocent could cleanse the village of evil. They picked you because no one would fight for you. That truth hit harder than the soil that once smothered me. Not because it was new, but because it was so ordinary. I had died because I was invisible, disposable, nothing more than a shadow in their story. I stood and looked at Chisholm, not with fury, but with a sadness that made his shoulders fold. I don't want your guilt, I told him. I want you to remember. Every time you hear laughter, every time you see a boy carrying water, I want you to remember what fear made you do. I walked to the community shrine next. It had been rebuilt, more polished than I remembered, with colored cloth and new offerings. But it still reeked of the same silence that had protected murder. I lit a fire at its base, not to destroy it, but to cleanse it. I poured water on the ground, then oil, then ash. And then I spoke, not to the gods, but to the ground. You tasted my blood once, but today you will taste my strength. That night I called the elders to the square, not to shame them, but to reveal them. I brought records, proof that they had taken land from widows, sold forest rights to strangers, sacrificed more than one innocent soul in the name of tradition. They had buried more than just me. I read out names, dates, testimonies, one by one. Some cried, some argued, some ran, but most sat frozen as the weight of their choices came back to haunt them. The village was silent for hours after I finished. Then an old woman, her back bent like a question mark, stood up. What do you want from us? She asked. Vengeance? No, I replied. I want something harder. I want change. And with that, I announced what I had been preparing in the shadows. A school for children like me, born poor, silent, forgotten. A center for women like my mother, who lost their voices not from illness, but from the cruelty of being unheard. I donated land, buildings, teachers, not for charity, for justice. And I named it after the one woman who had never stopped loving me, my mother. The next day, someone left a bowl of palm oil and yams at my doorstep. Then came soap, then cloth, then a goat, not as bribes, as apologies. And one by one, the same people who had once feared me, rejected me, buried me, now came to sit at my fire. I didn't forget what they did, but I didn't let it rot me either, because the greatest revenge is not a scream, it's a seed, one that grows so tall they can't ignore its shadow. And as I stood under the same stars I used to watch as a boy, and wonder if they watched me back, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not pain, not anger, peace, not because they had changed, but because I had. The weeks that followed felt like a slow sunrise after a night too long for memory, and every pale orange beam of change slid over Mbale like water over cracked stone, filling the wounds without erasing the scars. At first, the village moved gingerly around me, as if the mere brush of my shadow might stir the ghosts they once buried. But small acts of courage began to glimmer in unexpected corners. A girl who had never learned to read slipped into the half-built classroom at dusk and traced the alphabet on a dusty bench. A widower, once mocked for raising 3 daughters alone, volunteered to mend the school roof, his hammer blows ringing like new verses of an old hymn. Even Chisholm, the chief's son, arrived one dawn with sacks of cassava on his back and a shame-laced smile that said more than any apology could. I spoke little, letting the work itself braid us together, mixing mud for bricks beside men who once tied my wrists, planting moringa seedlings with women who had hurled stones at my silence. And in those shared labors, the village began to hear a rhythm older than vengeance, the steady, generous thump of possibility. My mother watched it all from the doorway of our patched hut, her eyes bright and wet, her hands trembling over the same prayer beads she'd clutched the night they stole me away. Though her voice never returned, the simple curve of her smile poured words enough for both of us. One evening, I led her, slow step by slow step, to the clearing where they'd buried me 15 years earlier. The cassava stalks were taller now, their leaves whispering like children gossiping about miracles, yet beneath the soil, I could still sense the hollow that once held my breath. I knelt, pressed my palm flat to the ground, and felt, not anger, not grief, but gratitude so fierce it stung my throat. We lived, I whispered, and though no sound rose from her lips, my mother placed her fingers on mine, sealing the sentence like a sacred stamp. The next day, the elders, stripped of their old authority, gathered under the udala tree to draft a new covenant. No life would ever again be sacrificed for superstition. Land seized from widows would be restored. Every child, cursed or blessed, would be granted the right to learn. They asked me to sign first. I hesitated, because power, even when offered humbly, still smells like the smoke that once suffocated me. But I thought of the school rising brick by patient brick, of the girls giggling over chalk dust, of the shy respect blooming in the chief's weary eyes, and I realized that accepting this future was not sinking into the past. It was turning the soil so something better could take root. I signed. The ink felt heavier than any blade I had ever imagined wielding. Nights grew calmer. Drums that once marked fear now beat for harvest dances. Laughter, once a weapon, returned dressed in warmth, and the wind that crosses Mbale at sunset carried stories of a boy who climbed out of the earth and taught the ground to bloom. Sometimes I still woke sweating, tasting dirt, but I would rise, step outside, and let the moonlight paint my skin silver until the tremor left my bones. And in that glow, I saw the truth Baba Ejike had tried to stitch into his tales all those years ago, that the strongest leather is stretched in darkness, that a soul rebounds because it has tasted the road. So I breathed in the scent of new roofs drying, distant yam stew simmering, damp earth forgiving, and I understood, for the first time without anger, that survival is not the end of the story. It is the hinge on which a brighter door swings open, wide enough for everyone who once turned their back on hope to walk through together. 15 years ago, they buried a boy they thought would vanish beneath the weight of their fear, silence, and shame. But I returned, not as a ghost clinging to revenge, but as a flame that lit the path for those still stumbling in the dark. Today, when I walk through Mbale, No one looks away. They nod. They greet me by name. The children call me Teacher Nana now, their voices full of life, not superstition. The school is finished, painted in clay red and sky blue. My mother's name carved above the entrance in soft gold letters. Ezine's House of Wisdom. The women bring food every week, not because they have to, but because they remember the years when their own hunger made them cruel. The men gather each Saturday under the neem tree to share stories, not gossip, but reflections. And when they speak of the past, their words carry both sorrow and resolve. Even the chief, now a quieter, older man, visits the school every month to read stories to the children, sitting cross-legged among them like a student again. He no longer wears his feathers or carries a cane. He says he wants to be remembered not for the boy he condemned, but for the hands that helped rebuild what fear destroyed. As for Chisholm, he asked to join the school's board, not to lead, but to listen. He told me, with a cracked voice, that he had a son now, a quiet boy who flinches at sudden sounds. I want him to live in a village where silence means peace, not danger, he said. I didn't reply with words. I just placed my hand on his shoulder and nodded. Some wounds, I've learned, do not need bandages. They need witnesses. And every time I kneel to tie a child's sandal or hand a chalkboard to a new student, I remember the weight of that soil pressing down on my chest. It keeps me humble. It keeps me awake. But it no longer defines me. I am not the boy they buried. I am the man who returned. Not to punish, but to plant. Not to haunt, but to heal. In the evenings, I sit with my mother on the porch, our feet in the cool dust, her silent prayers floating into the purple dusk like gentle birds. And sometimes, just sometimes, I let myself dream. I dream of villages where no child sleeps unloved, where no voice is silenced by fear, where justice is not a grave, but a garden. I dream of the world we are building, slowly, painfully, beautifully. One truth, one child, one healed heart at a time. And in the quiet, I remember something the wind once whispered through the cassava leaves on the night I pulled myself out of the earth. Dignity doesn't shout, it glows from within.